I'm excited. This is a topic, obviously you heard from some of the stats. This is a topic that affects a lot of people. And there's a lot that we can learn from each other, a lot that we can learn from just how God made us to work. And when we talk about that subject, people have all kinds of different reactions to it. So you're probably going to hear some things tonight that you may struggle with. You're going to hear some things where you go, yep, seen that, heard that, done that, been there, got the t-shirt. So that's what we expect to happen. Now, what you might not be expecting to happen, because we don't have tissue boxes on the tables, is a little bit of tears to come leaking out of your eyes. And that's okay too. Because some of these topics, starting with tonight, are going to hit home. Whenever we get deep in the weeds on this kind of stuff, people, like I said, have reactions to it, and sometimes it's deeply felt. Whether it's about yourself, a family member, a loved one, somebody who's not here anymore, it could be anything. So if that happens, if you need to stand up and walk to the back, that's fine. If you need to go out into the lobby or outside, that's fine too. I'm not the expert by far on this stuff. I just have a little more longevity in the issue than some of you guys do. That being said, if there are any doctors or nurses or medical professionals with much higher degrees than I on these subjects, this is not meant to be an insult to your profession. I'm just sharing what I've learned over the years and from the training that I've had, okay? When we get to week 3 and 4 on trauma and brain health, I will say that again because these topics have a lot to do with how the brain is built and how it's wired and how it works. And I am not a doctor, and I don't pretend to be one on TV either. So keep that in mind. We are going to do question and answer toward the end. If you got a burning question and it's right in league with what we're talking about, go ahead and shoot a hand up. We'll take questions. Try to keep extraneous questions to the end. I have about 45 minutes of material to go through. It will take longer because I'm a storyteller and I like to talk about my kids too much. By the way, did any of you pray for my wife like I asked you to? For those of you that don't know, maybe you weren't at church and somebody drug you here. My name is Todd. I've been a therapist for 26 years. I was trained to think about this stuff not in traditional psychology, but in a different way called marriage and family therapy. Traditional psychology says A plus B equals C. Marriage and family therapy says A plus M equals question mark. Okay, there's too much that influences any equation for us to nail it down to such a linear thing. Traditional psychology was the rule since Sigmund Freud, who was an idiot. And he started the whole thing. I think Jesus started the whole thing, but society says he did. And traditional psychology says, here's our client. They go into a mental hospital away from their family. They're there for a certain period of time, and they get better over time, and they're on medication and all that kind of stuff. And they go out for a weekend pass with their family. Just a weekend. And they come back. And when they get back to the hospital, they are the same or worse than when they first got there. And traditional psychology looks at that and says, aha, the family's the problem. Keep the client away from the family and we solve the problem. That's how traditional psychology thinks about this stuff. Marriage and family therapy came along and said, we can do better. So marriage and family therapy takes the client into the mental hospital. They work with them. Maybe they're on medication, maybe they're not. They get better. They go for the weekend. They come back. They're the same or worse than when they first got there. And they say, aha, the problem is in the family relationships. Let's work with the whole family. That's how I was taught to think about this stuff. And that's what traditional psychology is missing. They miss the entire systemic equation, which when I'm working with a client, my job is to look at it and think, okay, what else is affecting this equation than just the things that are obvious? That's how I think about things. My job is to look at something and go, how does this make sense to the client? Not just to theory. Why does it make sense to them that they're doing this? Doesn't have to make sense to me. My job is to understand why it makes sense to the client. So that's a little bit about me, where I come from. I spent most of my years working in residential settings with teenage girls. And God blessed me with 5 girls. I think he was preparing me for something. Married, 7 kids, 7 pets, 15 chickens. Used to, not anymore, thank goodness. And we finally got rid of our last puppy. My wife breeds golden retrievers. Some of you know that. Finally got rid of the last puppy 2 weeks ago. So the house is a lot calmer now. I love what I do. I tell people I have the best job in the world because I get to sit and talk with people every day about what makes life work and not work. And I get to learn from that. So I don't have to go make the same mistakes or have the same experiences than they do. And like I said, I'm a storyteller. I talk about my kids. None of my kids are in the room, so you'll probably hear a lot tonight. I love stories. I love storytelling because it's a medium that has been around since the beginning of time. How do we know the stories of Genesis and the Old Testament, the first 5 books, the Torah? How do we know that? Oral tradition, first of all, inspired writing from God, second of all. That's how everything was learned at one point, was passing down stories. And I think that's missing today. Yeah, we have movies, we have TV, we have books and podcasts and radio, and we have too much. We don't just sit around a campfire and tell stories anymore. We need to do that. So, how many of you feel anxious just looking at that screen? I have a picture in my old office on the wall. It's a picture of a lighthouse. It's a French lighthouse series. And I have one on the wall. And I purposefully got a level and put it up to the picture and slightly did that. Because what happens is when somebody who walks into my office and they have OCD, they point the picture out. Guess what? The picture is my diagnostic tool. I don't have to ask any more questions. Anxiety, like I said the other day on Sunday, it's a big deal. And COVID exposed how big of a deal it really was. Not just to the general population, but in particular with millennials and Generation Z. So let's talk about that for a little bit. COVID exposed a lot of things that our mental health system was already struggling with and amped them up to 11. Okay? Suicide rates went through the roof. Depression went above 40%. Anxiety went above 40%. And like I said, that's only the part we know about. We only know statistics like that because people report it. We don't know what they don't report. How many of you during COVID got a phone call and said, are you experiencing higher than normal levels of anxiety because of COVID? Notice there are no hands in the room. You did? They called you? Wow. That's a first. So COVID shined a light on a lot of stuff. Anxiety with children went through the roof. And now we have a generation of children who are struggling not just with anxiety and depression, but also with understanding social cues because they wore a mask for 2.5 years. Our mental health in our country and around the world, this doesn't just apply to America, our mental health has been under assault since March of 2020. And people are just now recovering from it, just now trying to get back to normal. So maybe this is God's timing that we're having this conversation. So let's talk a little bit about anxiety. Prior to COVID, 7.3%. That's, okay, anxiety's a thing, but it wasn't that big of a thing. And then COVID came along, and it ran up to 40%. And since COVID, it's dropped back down to 31 to 33%, depending on which study you look at. But that still means 1 out of every 3, okay? So again, look to your left, look to your right. If it's not you, it's one of those 2. At a debilitating level, okay? When I have people walk into my office and they are vibrating in the chair, there's something going on there. And by vibrating, I mean they can't sit still. And I'm not talking about ADD. Okay, I know what ADD looks like. Anxiety looks completely different. Okay, when children can't go to sleep at night because they think their parents are going to die from COVID, or a meteorite striking the house, or they forgot to lock a door, or they left the toaster on, your children go to bed thinking about these things. If they have any level of responsibility, they think about these things. I have one kid who is particularly scared to go to bed at night because of those kind of things. And sometimes it's an hour-long conversation at night to get him into bed. More prevalent in females, 10% more prevalent in females than it is in males. Okay? Part of that's societal. Part of that's how we handle difficulty in life. Part of that's the way God wired us. How many of you know who Mark Gungor is? Oh, we need to do a Mark Gungor series. Mark Gungor, little short Cuban dude. Sorry, Puerto Rican dude. And he was a pastor for 25 years. And he loves comedy, like closet stand-up comedian. Just loves it. So he stopped being a pastor and started going around to churches doing his talk on marriage. And his talk became known as Laugh Your Way to a Better Marriage. And it's hilarious. I mean, every 2 minutes you're laughing about something. But the way he describes it is he has 2 Greek columns on the stage, Greek or Corinthian, I don't know, I don't care. And he's got a bust of a female on this one and a bust of a male on this one. He walks over to the female and he takes the top of the skull off and he says, "Do you know what's in here?" He says, "Not a brain, but a bowl of wires." And in the female brain, all of those wires, when one thought fires off down one wire, they intersect with every other wire in the joint, which is why you have females, they're doing this thought hopping thing. And they never stop. And he walks over this side and he takes the top off and he says, "Do you know what's in here? Not a bowl of wires, but a series of boxes. And no box touches another box." And when a man is in a box thinking about one subject, he ain't thinking about a different subject. It does not happen. And if you walk in the room and introduce a new subject, you have to give him time to get out of that box, go find the other box, get in that box, and then he can engage you on that subject. Guys are going like this. Women are going like this. Okay? Now, there's one secret about the boxes that women are very jealous of. There's a little box over to the side called the nothing box. And when a man is in his nothing box, there is nothing going on. How many of you ladies would like one of those? See? Yeah. My nothing box is in my truck, driving. It could also be laying in bed staring at the ceiling. It could also be sitting on my back porch holding a spatula waiting for the burgers to be done. Some people, it's working in a shop, working under a car, walking out in the woods, whatever it is. That's what it is for some guys. And there are women I have found that have nothing boxes too. Very rare, but I have seen it. So part of it is how we're wired, okay? And we can talk about Genesis if we need to, but there's plenty of evidence that not just God made them male and female, he made their brains differently. He made them wire up differently and run in different directions. Okay? Anxiety is also more prevalent in younger ages. And this was interesting. It depends on which study you look at because, again, more prevalent at younger ages, the percentage gets less as they get older. But I found some studies where the percentage got bigger the older you got, whether it's about children or retirement or other stuff. So we'll call it even and just say there's a lot of anxiety out there, okay? So what are some symptoms of anxiety? Give me some ideas. Just shout them out. Racing thoughts, heart palpitations, sweating, lack of sleep, picking, fidgeting, not able to what? Concentrate, irritability. That's more depression. We'll talk about that next week. Indecision, yep. Pacing, yep. Let's see if we got all of that. Increased heart rate, racing thoughts, excessive worry, shallow rapid breathing, indecisiveness, fatigue, restlessness, muscle tension, lack of concentration, and easily agitated or irritability. Now, here's the thing. Some of that's more prevalent in adults. Some of it's more prevalent in teenagers or kids. Okay? Anxiety looks different in a kid than it does in an adult. Here's why. In a child, the way their brain works, when they don't like a thought that's going through their head, they use their emotions to regulate themselves. So when a child is struggling with understanding something or not liking what they're thinking, they're going to get more emotional. They're going to start coming unglued emotionally because they're trying to make this thing go away or calm down. Adults, because we have fully baked cookies in our heads, I like cookies, we do the opposite. We regulate our emotions with our thinking. What does the Bible say about that? Anybody know? Take every thought captive. What's the other one? Take every thought captive. What was it? That's one. There's a verse, I think it's in Genesis. Again, I'm not the Bible dude. There's a verse that says to not let our hearts make our decisions for us. And there's actually one in Proverbs also that says that children, the folly of children is making emotional decisions. My interpretation. So God clearly tells us at least 165 times in the Bible not to be afraid, not to worry, not to be anxious. 165 times. It's not 365 like people say it is. It's less. But 165 times, and that's even 136. 136 times in the Bible, God says, do not be anxious, do not worry, do not fear. Some of those are even said by Jesus to his apostles or to the crowd. Don't be anxious for anything. When's the last time when you were anxious about something, that verse came to your head? Do not be anxious about anything, but by prayer and supplication, bring your requests to Jesus. To God, I think it actually says. We need to take that seriously. We need to be using that on a daily basis. I'm not great at praying and reading my Bible every day, but I have conversations with God all day long. God, what do you want me to do about this? What do you want me to do with this client? What assignment do you want me to give them? What do you want me to do with my kid about this? God, help my wife with this. God, help me with this. All day long. And I believe I experience less anxiety because of it. So what is anxiety? I already gave you a clue. If we're talking about the emotional spectrum, what is it? Doubt. Fear. Anxiety is fear. How do we know that? Well, there was a guy named Paul Ekman who was an anthropologist and a psychologist. He went around the world for 25 years studying people groups. And he watched how they reacted on their face emotionally to any situation that came up. And what he discovered is, regardless of their gender, regardless of their age, regardless of their language, regardless, the muscles on their face all move the same. So for a female in India who has no money, fear on her face looks exactly the same as somebody in America who's completely different. The muscles on our face move the exact same way. That's what he studied. So he brought it down to 4 basic emotions. Happy, sad, anger, and fear. That's it. Now you go to some therapist websites or you read some books and they'll tell you there's 500,000 different emotions. Well, the last time I looked, I feel stupid is not an emotion, that's a thought. And I feel hungry is not an emotion, it's a physiological desire. okay? There are only a handful of emotions. When I'm working with a client who struggles in this area, the first thing I have them do is work these 4 words into their vocabulary. For whatever reason, we don't grow up talking about how we feel about stuff, how we feel emotionally about things. When you don't have a good vocabulary for how you feel about things, you're going to be a little jumpy when you're feeling it because you haven't been able to express it. You haven't been able to talk about it. Just talking about things makes it better because guess what? We're not the only one thinking it. Now it's out in the air. It's out in the public. So Paul Ekman came up with these 4, but over the years he's added a few more to it. Guilt, shame, disgust, and surprise. Again, by studying the muscles on people's faces. Okay? You like that statement? We're supposed to be anxious. Think about it. If you're walking out in the woods of Montana on a trail around Flathead Lake and you hear, what are you going to think? Bear! You're going to reach for your gun or your bear spray and you're going to start running. You're going to be a little on edge, a little fearful in that moment. Okay? We're supposed to have anxiety. It serves a purpose. And we'll talk a little bit later about how that gets changed around. Anxiety is normal. When we're driving down the road on a 2-lane road and we pass a car, we don't even think about it because we've adapted our ability to handle a situation like that. A car's driving past us. We're driving in our lane. We're trusting they're going to stay in our lane. Maybe we're not. And we go on about our day. It's no big deal. But 1,000 years ago, they didn't have cars, and you're walking by something at a 130 mile an hour closure rate, you're going to be ducking. You're going to be getting out of the way of whatever that thing is that's coming at you that quick because it's going to scare you. It's going to frighten you. Anxiety is normal. We're supposed to have it. Not at a debilitating level, but we're supposed to have it because things in life are unavoidable and inevitable. We can't have a perfect life. Things aren't going to go perfectly all the time. And when things aren't going perfectly, we're going to feel some kind of way about that. The question is, what are we going to do with that feeling? Are we going to allow it to take over, or are we going to use it in the way that we're supposed to? And I'll give you some examples of that here in a minute. So, anxiety is normal, unavoidable, and inevitable. So let's talk about your brain for a little bit. This is one model. There are many different ones. This one's just nice and simple. It's called the triune brain theory. Our brains are formed bottom up and inside out. Okay, so literally top of your spine, it went like this. Okay, so the first section right on top of the spinal column is the brainstem. And the brainstem is very good at only a handful of things. Fight, flight, and freeze response. Baby-like emotions of love and fear. Like really, really basic stuff. And that's it. It cannot process information. It couldn't do 2 + 2 to save its life. Okay? So, fight, flight, and freeze, love and fear. That's it. That's all it can do. The next section up, there's actually a couple in between, but we're keeping this simple. The limbic system. You've probably heard about that. It's found its way into popular vernacular here in the last couple years. It's about emotions and relationships. Relationships with people, with how you feel about people, but also spatial relationships. Our limbic system is an experience engine. Okay? It just experiences things. When you walk into a room and you go, somebody's not happy in here, but you don't know who it is yet, your limbic system figured that out. It's like 5 minutes ahead of you. It literally works 5 times faster than any other part of your brain. It can read things really quick. I can't snap fast enough. The last section, very top of the brain, just under your skull, is the neocortex. Think filing cabinets. 2 + 2 = 4. I like pizza, and I went to Vancouver for a vacation 5 years ago. That's the kind of information that's in there. It also processes. It can do math. It can pull up a definition of a word. Storage beyond belief, okay? And when we get to, week 4, brain health, we'll talk about more specifically about parts of the brain and what they do. Fascinating stuff. Don't bring your cell phones. You'll want to kill them. So this is what it looks like. Brainstem at the bottom, limbic system, cortex on the top, okay? When we talk about regulation, bottom-up regulation is the best form. That's for a different topic, but bottom-up regulation is the best way to regulate ourselves even when we're anxious, okay? So when a person has chronic trauma, anxiety, or stress, okay, we're talking about anxiety tonight, but all of these work the same way. We're talking years, multiple issues, debilitating anxiety, the stuff that we can't find any other way to deal with, okay? When that happens, which part of the brain do you think reads that first? Limbic. Somebody was paying attention. So our limbic system experiences it, okay? And all it does is go, I'm anxious. What do I do now? I can't think. What do I do? So because this person has chronic anxiety, a gate comes slamming down on their neocortex and literally turns it off. The lights go out. You can put somebody in an fMRI machine and watch that part of their brain go dark. It does not light up in a state of anxiety. Okay? When you are dealing with somebody with high emotionality, ain't no logic getting in. I'm from the South, I can say ain't. Our brains can only do one of two things at a time. High emotionality or logic. Cannot do both. So if somebody's highly emotional about something, don't even try to tell them what to do. Don't even try to talk sense into them. It ain't getting in. So when this gate comes slamming down and turns that part of the brain off, the limbic system is still trying to hand this piece of information off to decide what to do. So where does it go? The only part of the brain left that can think is the brainstem. So it hands it off to the brainstem. What's the brainstem do? Fight, flight, and freeze, love, and fear. That's it. So what kind of processing do you think we're going to get out of the brainstem when this large anxiety situation happens with the neocortex of our brain turned off? Are we going to make good decisions? Are we going to have a good time? Are we going to do some crazy stuff? You bet. So what do? Well, as we are people who do what I do, as we are working with somebody like this, we need to teach them how to breathe, how to cope, and how to ground. Okay? I usually do this in my office where I have a bigger chair, but let's say I'm sitting in my office comfy chair, and I'm sitting like this. How grounded am I? I'm not. About 1.25 inches of me is touching the ground. If I can move it, I can't ground with it. Grounding means my body knows where I am in space. If my body doesn't know where I am in space, my brain is working overtime to try to figure out, where are we right now? What are we doing? If I'm sitting in my chair, my brain's going, how come we haven't fallen on our butt yet? We're at a weird angle. Why aren't we falling? I can't ground with a chair. I can't ground with a couch. I can't ground with a bed. Ladies, have trouble sleeping at night? 45 minutes after you can't go to sleep, pull your blanket and your pillow on the floor, you'll be asleep in 5 minutes. Because you can't ground with a mattress. You can only ground with the floor. Or solid objects like a door frame. I have teenagers do this all the time. Go stand in the doorway, put your hands on the door frame. Guess what? There are 5 points of contact on your hand, each hand. And you got 2 feet on the floor. Just breathe for 4 minutes. At the end of 4 minutes, they're like, man, do I feel better? Because you grounded. Because you did something to deal with your physiological nature. Remember, we're not made to go 130 miles an hour at something. okay? We're going to get anxious about stuff. The question is, what do we do with it when it happens? So when we teach somebody breathing skills, coping skills, and grounding skills, a lot can change just because of that. And you realize very quickly you can handle more than you think you can. So once we start doing that, the gate goes away. The brain starts to light up again. We get little colors going on, reds and greens and yellows, which means our limbic system doesn't have to hand it off to the brainstem. Now it can hand it off to the part of the brain that can think through something. Bible tells us 3 times what not to think about. Only once does it tell us, 3 times what to think about, only once what not to think about. Do you think it's important what we think about? Absolutely. So because the limbic can hand it off to the cortex now, we can think again. Let me give you an example. I'll do the anxiety example first and this example second. So if I'm walking down a street at night on a sidewalk, I got sidewalk, street, buildings. Street light, dark. Okay? And if I'm a little bit prone to anxiety, I'm not going to like my surroundings already. I'm walking down the street, there's nobody around. I pass by an alley, and immediately as I pass by the alley, I hear a trash can lid rattle. What's the first thing I do? Because I still have a startle reflex. We all do. And because I am chronic anxiety and the gate is down on me, which it's down all the time, not just when the situation happens, I immediately go to fight, flight, and freeze, love, and fear. So I'm either going to punch whatever's coming out of the alley, or I'm going to take off, or I'm going to stand here and go, you can't see me, you can't see me, you can't see me. So that's how chronic anxiety experiences that event. Now let's see how somebody who doesn't have that or has worked out their anxiety experiences it. Same street, street lights, dark, street buildings, walking down the street. I'm okay with my surroundings. I pass by the same alley. I hear the trash can lid rattle because I still have a startle reflex. It's probably that cat that I saw go in there 15 seconds ago. He's probably just looking for food. Everything's fine, and I keep walking. Notice the first person didn't remember the cat. Why? Because the gate was down and they had no access to a memory from 15 seconds ago. Big difference, isn't it? So what's the purpose of anxiety? Remember I said there's a purpose for it. We need to have it. So part of that's protection. If I'm walking through the woods here in Montana and I hear roar, I'm going to pull out my gun and be ready to shoot a bear. If it's a friend playing a prank on me, they're in trouble. Decision making, anxiety sometimes propels us to make a decision. Maybe faster than we want to, maybe it's even the wrong decision, but it pushes us to make a decision. Motivates action, along the same lines, but anytime we feel uncomfortable, we get motivated to do something, to move. Signals importance for something. I tell you what, when my kids cried when they were babies, all 7 of them, I took their cry as importance. I hate it when my babies cry. So maybe that's why. I was very uncomfortable with my kids being in pain or not being okay. But I learned, I had to go to daddy boot camp to learn this. Daddy boot camp taught me that a baby has 4 cries. I had to learn what all 4 of those were. And once I learned what all 4 of those were, I was okay with them crying because I knew what the cry meant. But I had to go to daddy boot camp to learn that. Growth and development. When we are anxious about something in our life, this happens especially for young adults. When we get anxious about what is my next step, what does God want for me? What am I going to do about this relationship? What am I going to do about this job? That's a growth and development process, and our anxiety in those moments are propelling us to grow, but sometimes we take it as an inadequacy. There's something wrong with me. Everybody else seems okay with this, but I'm not okay with this. There must be something wrong with me. No. You just haven't learned yet. Millennials and Gen Z, all of my kids are Gen Z. They need to learn that it's okay to struggle with things. They need to learn that it's okay that you don't understand everything. You're not supposed to. I've been around the sun 50 times. You've only been around the sun 18. You're not going to know as much. You haven't experienced as much. But they look at life going, look at all these people that know how to do all this stuff. I should be like them. No, not yet. And anxiety does one other thing, and this is where people get tripped up. It asks a question. When anxiety arrives, when the moment hits, anxiety is always asking a question. It could be, do I have the tools I need to handle this? Am I safe? Can I handle this? Am I good at this? Is that person okay? Is that person safe? Anxiety is always asking a question. So when it asks the question, do we answer it or not? Because if we don't answer the question, if we get sidelined on, oh no, there goes my rapid heart rate. There goes my breathing. I'm having a panic attack. What am I focused on? The anxiety, not the question. If I can't go answer the question, am I safe? Do I have what I need? Can I handle this? If I don't answer that question, the anxiety cannot go away. It must stay until I answer the question. And just because I answer the question doesn't mean I can beat up Andre the Giant. Some of y'all don't know who that is. It doesn't mean I become Superman. It means I answered the question. I could still be scared after that. I could still have whatever the problem is in front of me after that, but I answered the question. So if we don't answer the question, I have people sit in my office all the time. They want to tell me about their anxiety, not about their issues, not about the questions, not about the things they need to solve. I don't need to hear about their anxiety. I get anxiety. I want to hear about the problems, because if we can answer those questions, 50% or more of your anxiety is going to go away just because. So let's do that. People come into my office all the time and say, Todd, I've got anxiety. I need to make my anxiety go away. No, let's talk about how your brain works, because you need to learn that first. So, I'm moving fast. This is the last slide. Anxiety is normal. Anxiety is not the big boogeyman that everybody makes it out to be. I had a 61-year-old male sitting in my office years ago. His wife had filed for divorce. He did not want to get a divorce. So one night, she came with him. She had never met me before, first time I'd ever met her. And within 15 minutes, she stood up and said, "You are the worst counselor on the planet," and walked out the door. And I never saw her again. About 30 seconds later, the husband, still sitting on the couch, said, "Should I go after her?" No. She can do what she needs to do. And then he said, "I'm really sorry for my wife doing that. Don't apologize. You didn't do it, she did. And I've been called worse." He was always anxious about his relationship with his wife. Part of it was their communication. Part of it was his own experiences growing up as a child. And what he had to learn was these emotions that you're experiencing, that you actually communicate all the time without even realizing you're doing it, are God-given normal things. They're part of the human experience that you need to accept and not try to repress. He was Mr. Logic. He was literally a walking robot. You could not, this guy knew everything. He was 6 foot crazy and arms as big as my legs. He had been a logger, but he started out as an electrical engineer building computers back in the 60s and 70s. He was brilliant about machines. He was ignorant about people and relationships and emotions. And he said, "Todd, I don't have emotions." I said, "Yes, you do. You just need to learn how to talk about them." And one of his big ones was anxiety, because he was always afraid of what his wife was going to do or what his kids were going to do. He had 4 boys. And he didn't know what to do with it. And over time, he would start coming into my office. For my first question for everybody is, how you doing? And my expectation is an emotional response, one of the 4. And he got to the point where he would say, you know what? Today I'm a little scared and a lot happy. And I said, good. Let's talk about it. And we did. He had to learn how to talk about being afraid of things. Because in his world, growing up, you weren't allowed to be afraid. And guys in the room, we need to know how to talk about how we feel about things. It is not our job to keep it all bottled up inside. That's dangerous. Like I said, anxiety is not the big bad boogeyman. We need to learn how to talk about how we feel about things and talk through the tough things. Number one question I ask kids and adults is, did you talk about it? Usually with their parent or spouse or whatever. 99.9% of the time, nope. Well, guess what your homework is? Time to go talk about it. One more brain piece. Sympathetic versus parasympathetic nervous system. My words, hard mode and soft mode. Hard mode is I'm up, I'm moving around, I'm doing stuff. Okay, that's sympathetic nervous system. Okay. Parasympathetic nervous system is soft mode. That's where my body goes when I sleep or when I'm deeply resting. Okay? And it can only happen that way. So, if I'm always in hard mode, if I'm always in the sympathetic nervous system, my body can't repair anything. So, I have scars on my hands, mostly from cats that I like to play with too much. When I get a scar, my body goes about healing that scar. Okay? First, it's going to remove any bacteria, hopefully, and I don't get infected. Then it's going to start forming a skin over it. And over time, it's going to heal and heal and heal and heal. And now I can rub it and do all kinds of craziness to it, and it doesn't hurt. Same thing happens in our brain. The scars that happen in our life, in our heart and in our brain, affect us the same way as our skin, but in our brain. Guess when that healing in the brain happens? Only during parasympathetic. Only when we're sleeping. So guess what happens when you're only sleeping 2, 3, 4, 5 hours a night? You're not getting enough healing. Anybody know what glial cells are? G-L-I-A-L. Oh, I'm the only one. Okay, I'm going to teach you something. Glial cells are like little janitors in our brain. And they only come out during parasympathetic while we're sleeping. And they need 7 hours to do their job. Their job is to go around and sweep up all the little toxins that fall on the floor in our brain when we think. When I do 2 + 2 = 4, I just had a whoosh of toxins fly across from one synapse to another. And that dust, the trail of dust it leaves, falls on the ground falls on the floor in my brain and stays there until those glial cells, the little janitors, come out and sweep it up at night. And it takes them 7 hours to do their job. Guess what happens if they don't get all 7 hours to complete their job? Brain fog, fatigue, confusion, lack of decision making, blah, 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 blah. Sound familiar? And it takes 7 hours for them to do their job. So if you get 6 hours of sleep, there's 1 hour of toxins left on the floor in your brain. So all those people that say I only need 4 or 5 hours to sleep at night, that's not what your brain needs. Your brain needs more. But the big thing is, the parasympathetic nervous system is where the healing happens. That's where we get healing in our brain, in our body, all the stuff that needs healing. That's when it happens, is at night, when we're sleeping. Okay? So, questions?